Hello, my name is Brady Buckner. I'm the president of the Financial Services Innovation Coalition, or FSIC as we call it. FSIC is a network of industry innovators, legislators, community groups, and academics who share a passion for applying emerging technology and market innovation to create a more inclusive economy and advocate for policy that promotes economic empowerment. FSIC believes that a more inclusive economy will improve the quality of life for all Americans. Our topic today is using employee stock ownership programs, or ESOPs, to increase societal impact. Our guest today is a longtime friend of FSIC. We're delighted to have him speak on this subject. I'm going to give him a brief intro. He is an executive with more than 10 years of ESOP fiduciary experience and more than 20 years of experience as a finance specialist, operator, board member, and consultant. Throughout his career, he led and advised management teams in areas of finance, technology, valuation, and strategy by leveraging his experience in capital markets and as a business operator. And Alberto, I got to say, when people watch this, they're going to say, there's no way a guy that looks that young and handsome has this much experience. What's going on here? Who are you bringing on the show? So tell us a little bit about yourself and why this subject of ESOPs is so important to society.
Yeah. Brady, thanks for that. It's an honor to do this for Physic. I mean, I'm certainly excited. And, thinking about my bio, I'm lucky to have had the kind of experiences that I've had. It came somewhat as hard work. Some of it is about being in the right place at the right time, but also about being able to have the opportunity to invest of myself in opportunities as they come. And so it sort of brings me full circle into the concept of employee ownership. But my own background really is finance. Like a lot of folks coming out of college, I started off as an analyst and an associate working in investment banking and both private and public investing. I had the chance, after going back to business school, I had the chance to actually go back to work for my family's business. My father came here from Cuba in 1960, started a minority-owned business, really understood the struggles of what it's like. He was an old sugar mill engineer and established a business in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, of all places. An extraordinary place, an extraordinary time.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah. And I'm fortunate to have learned a lot from my father, but he was welcoming of all of our siblings' participation in the business. And when I got out of business school, it seemed like the right opportunity to be able to just help. And I had a chance to work in the operations of that business, work in the mergers and acquisitions / corporate development capacity and business development capacity for that business. I helped start our first office outside of our core geographic region in Texas. And one of the challenges we had was, okay, we're dad's aging. What do we do with the business? What are our choices? And we thought about selling our business to a private equity firm at the time. This was 2007, 2008 timeframe, and oil was rich. It was $130 a barrel before the 2008 financial crisis, and we explored a number of alternatives for business transition. And this really relates to the topic today of employee ownership, because we landed on employee ownership as a solution, as a family.
Isn't this a theme that's happening? You talked about it a little bit when we were before we started, that this is a huge opportunity. Situations like this, and the fact that it's so personal to you that you lived through it, really makes you a great person to speak on this subject.
Well, it is, and one of the reasons why I became such an advocate for employee ownership is simply, we announced that we were transitioning the wealth in our business through an employee stock ownership plan to our employees. And not long after that, after we announced it, I got a big hug from a 280-pound welding supervisor, who just said thank you. Thank you for not selling this business to Jacobs Engineering or Shaw Group or some faceless private equity firm. Thanks for selling this business to us.
It sounds exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. That
Well,
it's affecting real people, is what you're saying.
It does, and this kind of gets at the heart of what and so that experience really informs what I do today, and not only what I do professionally, but also what I get to advocate for as a professional. Today I serve as I help transition that business to employee ownership, and today I serve as a trustee, helping other business owners with that same transition, where I actually represent the employee owners in that transition of ownership. When an ESOP is formed, legally speaking, the employees don't actually buy the business. A trust is formed, and that trust purchased the business, and no different than if you were, starting a trust for your kid's college fund. You have a trustee, and
And that's your business. What's the name of your business again?
The business that I have is called Custos Fiduciary Services. We provide trustee services for businesses in the United States as well as in Canada. We also do some specific consulting related to employee stock ownership plans and employee ownership trusts. And for me, it's actually really gratifying to be a part of that, because every day in my work, I know that what I do is an opportunity for somebody else.
All right. Could you talk a little bit about the silver tsunami? And
yes,
you were explaining that to me, and I'd heard other things about it, but I didn't realize that this opportunity was boiling up like right now.
I think the silver tsunami is one of the most extraordinary economic trends that we have seen in the last, call it, it's one of the most extraordinary economic trends that we've seen. And everyone is familiar, I think, with aging baby boomers, and what the effect that's had on broad-based consumption in the economy. What that's having to the lack of skilled workers,
Right.
As that knowledge begins to retire from the workforce, the intergenerational wealth transfer that exists. But the other big piece that I think is starting to be talked about more and more is all these baby boomers have a lot of businesses. Just think about that for a second. Almost half of the businesses in the US are controlled by retiring business owners who were born in the baby boom generation.
Wow.
2.9 million businesses in the US where the owners have an age greater than 55. These businesses represent 32 million employees and 1.3 trillion in worker payroll. And this massive ownership transition represents what I believe, if we do this right, it represents one of the greatest opportunities to create equality in our nation's history.
And this is equality for minority groups, for people that are haven't had economic opportunities to build generational wealth. This is not something they're thinking of, and that's why we've got to get the word out. And when you say 1.3 trillion in payroll and 6.5 trillion in revenue, we got to handle this right, because this could set us off on a next level economy.
Brady, that's exactly right. I mean, and I'll talk about some anecdotal stories that I have. I spent some time with a client of mine who had a speaker. She, this is a woman who started off as a plumber on her tools. She's an employee at an employee-owned business in California. Today, the stock value that she has in her ESOP is $1 million. She's a female Latin American. Family's originally from Mexico, first generation United States. She started off as a plumber on her tools, and she now has a retirement account in Mexico. I have other clients that, have been employee owned and then eventually that company sold. This isn't about the business itself. This is about the effect that that has on workers. And I can point to the number of times where I've seen a truck driver walk away because their business sold with $1 million check. Now, those are the unicorn stories. But one of the things we'll talk about further on is just sort of the social impact that employee ownership has. I liken the silver tsunami as a fastball, right over the plate, right across the letters. It's the opportunity to hit a real home run and create equality and create intergenerational wealth where perhaps there was none. And so I think there's, this driver is being talked about. And employee ownership is a solution. Will private equity be able to suck up 2.9 million businesses?
Well, nor do we want them to, based on what private equity and hedge funds have done to the housing market. Anyway, I don't mean to get off on a tangent, but again, this comes into play.
And I think it's more of a function of what an employee-owned business and because it's a worker-owned business. There's a general commitment to workers, and I'll talk about that later on. But employee ownership takes a couple of various forms, right? I mean, there's traditional employee-owned cooperatives. Examples of cooperatives are REI is a cooperative. They're a customer-owned cooperative, right? There's a number of. It is a company which is governed democratically. It's one of the oldest forms of employee ownership. Something that is newer to the United States, but is more common in Europe, specifically in the United Kingdom, as well as starting to take place in Canada, is employee ownership trust, or an EOT. This is like a light version of the ESOP, right? It is a simple state law trust. The owner either sells or contributes their shares into a trust, and that perpetual trust effectively owns the business. An employee ownership trust is a tax advantaged version of a employee ownership trust. We were fortunate in 1974 to have the Employment Retirement Security Act. Before the 1970s, there was a lot of, let's say, there was a lack of fiduciary judgment, particularly with, honestly, a friend of mine joked the other day that the Employment Retirement Security Act of 1974 was established to keep the mafia out of retirement savings. If you've ever heard some of the stories about the Teamsters Union pension plan and involvement by the mafia from the 60s, and so one of the things that was established with the Employment Retirement Security Act of 1974, and this was actually championed by Russell Long. Russell Long was the senator from Louisiana. He met an economist named Lou Kelso. And the two of them got together and said, if workers owned their businesses, wouldn't the business be nicer? Wouldn't it be better? And Senator Long thought, yeah, when I drive around Columbia, Louisiana, my hometown, I think it's Columbia, excuse me. When I drive around Columbia, and you drive through a neighborhood where people own the houses versus rent, the houses where neighborhoods are owned by people are just nicer. There's a pride of ownership. There's a direct line of sight into the condition of it because this is your asset. And so from there, within the confines of the Employment Retirement Security Act of 74, we established an idea of putting an employee stock ownership trust where the shares are owned in a retirement plan, has certain benefits. It's a regulated entity, right? Because the Employment Retirement Security Act of 1974 is enforced by the Department of Labor. So there's strict rules around how ESOPs are managed. It's a company-funded benefit. Companies that form an ESOP receive favorable tax treatment to allow for the employee beneficiaries to build retirement savings.
No,
It
just to
allows,
step back for a second. You've been saying it out, but it's known in the industry as ERISA. Is that correct?
yes,
ERISA. Okay.
it is. Yeah, it is a retirement plan covered under ERISA. It allows for a smooth transition from existing owners to the company's employees over time. It is a market-based solution. In other words, oftentimes the ESOP trustee actually purchases the securities from a selling business owner. Now, the ESOP trustee receives, the company funds that benefit by borrowing money, either from banks or from the seller him or herself, to be able to execute that stock purchase. But that facilitates that wealth transfer. Effectively, it's a way of saying, hey, the value of the business is here today. The trust is going to buy that business at no more than fair market value. What do employees realize? They realize the benefit of the value of the business as they retire or leave the company when the company actually repurchases its shares. And so, I'm spending a lot of time talking about ESOPs just because it's a lot of what I do. But it is legally and practically speaking, it is a retirement plan. But unlike a 401k, no employee puts their own money.
Okay.
Um,
That I didn't know. So
ESOP,
you're saying on an ESOP that they don't have to put a big chunk of money down to get into this plan to transition to business?
they would actually put zero money down.
Because I think
The
a
benefit is
trust
fully
version you
funded by
do,
the
they
company.
have to put something into it.
No, in the trust version, same approach, same approach. In an EOT, typically there's, whether it's an EOT or, well, I can't speak for all EOTs, but I would say the common structure you see with an employee ownership trust or an ESOP is that the company goes out and borrows money, loans that to the trust, and then the shares are purchased by the trust on behalf of the ESOP.
Okay, thank you for clarifying
So,
that.
but the important part is unlike a 401k where you put your own money in, you're not putting your own money in. Brady, it's kind of like your mom and dad give you a house and they hand you the keys and say, hey, Brady, just pay off the mortgage. And you'll get the home equity when you're done. That's
Wow.
a lot of ways how an ESOP works. It is a very, so it is whether you handle ownership transition through an ESOP or through an employee ownership trust or other form of employee of shared ownership, those things can be facilitated without worker investment. And that's the magic of how this employee ownership can create intergenerational wealth.
Right.
So
okay.
If we think about it, you're giving 32, if we did this for every business owner who's retiring that's age 55 or older, that's 32 million American workers that will simply get a house. And as long as they pay off the mortgage, show up to work every day, do their job, they'll hopefully get some home equity out of that. And I think that's the magic of that, right?
So
and
I see
that could be,
oh, go ahead.
that could be magical in and of itself.
I see on your slide here about the taxes. The beauty of a 401k is, as everyone knows, is that your growth in that is non-taxable. So you're compounding the money a lot faster because you don't have that tax coming out every year. It's a real benefit for people retiring. Another aside to that is that starting with my generation, 401k was your only retirement. You did not have, in many cases, a pension. So in a lot of cases, for the next generation, 401ks we know aren't going to be enough because people can't afford to put enough in them. So an ESOP seems to me that just by showing up and doing their job, they don't have to put, 5 or 10% of their paycheck into the 401k. They can just have the ESOP plan, and the longer they're there, the bigger the value grows. Is that true?
I would say yes, but I mean, diversify, if I was your financial advisor, I would tell you diversify your retirement savings, right?
That was
But
another
at the end
question I
of the
had.
day, that is, so ESOPs were established to give workers this opportunity. I like to say oftentimes an ESOP may be a retirement plan, but it's not your retirement savings. It's an opportunity for you as a worker to feel the joys and benefits and fruits of being an owner, and sometimes the sorrow, right? I mean, not every business is successful, and sometimes things don't go the way you planned. Now, you didn't put anything in to begin with at the onset. So the question is okay, did you have the risk of loss? But at the same time, I think it is a solution to what we would call the silver tsunami. How is an ESOP solution supported differently from other employee ownership forms? Well, the employee-owned business, the ESOP-owned business, typically as an S corp does not pay federal income tax. So, like a 401k, you're able to grow on a tax-deferred basis. An ESOP-owned company grows on a tax-deferred basis. By the company not paying taxes, and then taxes are realized upon retirement or liquidation of the employee benefit. So
Okay,
that's a little bit about ESOPs. I mean, there are only 7,000 of them in the U.S., but do cover 14 million American workers. If you ever go to Brookshire Brothers or Publix or everybody who took up baking during the pandemic, you buy King Arthur flour. I'm a big baker in my house. So that's Gore-Tex if you hunt, fish, or play guitar.
sure. Oh my God, that's a big one.
The Gore technology company, they have a number of individuals that think about uses for Gore-Tex, and Cliff Bar is another one of my favorites, but there's 7,000 ESOPs. Some of them are name brands, some of them are not. But almost 14 million American workers, so roughly a little more than 10% of the American workforce.
Wow.
States, there's an ESOP in every state. I would say Pennsylvania, for whatever reason, has the highest number of ESOPs per capita. Obviously California having the highest. I think some of that is driven obviously by population, as well as some of that tax policies drives ESOPs to be a very attractive solution in a state like California. I'll talk a little bit about some of the drivers in employee ownership, but we've talked about the silver tsunami, these demographic changes, but employee ownership really has an impact on family economics. Employee-owned businesses have 30% higher average wages for workers of color, 43% higher wages for single parents, and typically workers in employee-owned businesses have 1.9, almost 2 times greater household wealth. And the infographic talks about 2 to 3 times greater retirement plan assets. When you compare what a worker in an employee-owned business has versus a non-worker, and these are statistics that come from the Reuters as a Center on Employee Ownership.
Okay.
The political landscape is I think very interesting from a congressional perspective. I think everyone in Congress understands this. In fact, I was looking at there was a recent 2018. There was some additional legislation passed called the Main Street Employee Ownership Act. You had Senator Gillibrand and Cory Booker, Senator Gillibrand from New York, Cory Booker from New Jersey, and Senator Young from Indiana, both as co-sponsors of the bill. Two people from all sides of the ideological spectrum. I remember there was some employee ownership legislation that was sponsored by Ron Johnson and Bernie Sanders simultaneously.
Okay. Wow.
How often do you have that? And I think this is one of the few, this is one of the things, Brandy, I think that as, this is one of the financial innovations that everybody can get behind.
Well, it makes sense
Or
because it's going to affect people equally from either side of the aisle when you're talking about their constituents.
it is, it affects, and it's we're using tax policy, positive tax policy. We're using a market-based solution to implement. Where could we do better? I think the ESOP Association has been very public about this, for a need for guidance from the regulatory stakeholders, the Department of Labor. And I won't spend a lot of time talking about that, but I think generally speaking, policyholders need to be aware that this exists and need to be thoughtful about friction in the creation of ESOPs. Because again, if we handle the silver tsunami wrong, if we make it too hard to become employee owned, if we make it too hard to become an ESOP, we will miss the greatest opportunity to create equality in our nation's history.
I've been thinking about this since we started talking about it, and correct me if I'm wrong, because this is what I put together myself. I've been in the financial services for many, many years, and this seems like it's half the businesses in this country are eligible for this. And let's say some percentage of that versus the owners, I mean, let's call it the baby boomers, selling their business to the highest bidder, which in a lot of cases could be an international entity, which we're not against that, but I think it would be terrible for all that wealth to start leaving the country versus having some regular workers that have put in their time, and given their heart to the business, then able to retire with a real good quality of life. To me, that seems to be the difference. And on the first one, the difference is all of those employees would now have to go find employment somewhere else in an economy that's being changed dramatically by AI and robotics. So we're gonna have to come back and talk about this again from a policy standpoint. Even more exciting.
I think that's right, and I'll tell you, Brady, to support what you just said, I can't tell you the number of times I've talked to business owners who, in order to implement employee ownership, they decided to make an economic sacrifice. 9 times out of 10, the business owners you meet, they have a legitimate care and love for their employees. That's not all the time, right? But when you start a family-owned business, those people are like your family. I mean, I got taught how to drive a dump truck by somebody that I work with, and now's an employee owner. And so when you put it in those contexts and think about the power of that, my point is this: is that owners care about legacy. They care about making sure that the people that they brought into their company are treated like that, and are treated in a manner that with respect, with dignity, with compassion, and with stability. And so the number of times I've seen business owners say, yeah, I'll knock, in order to make the ESOP happen, I'll knock X amount off the price, or to ensure that a partial ESOP was being sold to make sure that everyone was supportive of the transition and got something out of the sale to the business. And so I just time and time again, I've seen people make those sacrifices. And then for long-term employee-owned, mature employee-owned businesses, they create a positive and measurable impact on the workers that they employ. And so that's that's really what I wanted to talk about.
The beauty of that is that we have so many single owner businesses where all the money goes right to one person or one family, and the employees that have been there forever eventually realize what's happened is that made a living, but they're not going to get that, kind of end of career benefit from it. So, well, as we close, Alberto, do you have any final thoughts about maybe what we should do from a policy standpoint or what we shouldn't do?
Yeah. I think policy needs to continue to ensure that we have a positive environment for the creation of employee ownership transition, regardless of the form, whether it's EOTs, cooperatives, or ESOPs. That if we threaten, and I would tell you it has been challenging as of late. If transitions to employee ownership are threatened, we will miss out on a fantastic opportunity. And so
Okay,
I would encourage organizations like Physic to just get involved in this, because just because of the sheer enormity of
well, whether you like it or not, we're involved through you. So,
yeah.
all right, this has been an absolutely wonderful conversation. Before we go, I'd like to thank all of the FSIC network members for their efforts to promote economic empowerment and social justice. This is very important. Alberto, you're one of those warriors. You've been with us for a long time. You've been a supporter back when nobody was listening. And I just can't thank you enough for being here today. I really do want you to come back sometime. We can talk about more intimately about how the ESOP is going to affect the employees and then society as a whole, kind of like today, but a little more in depth. So everybody, our website is fsicoalition.org. That's fsicoalition.org. And Alberto, do you want to give your website?
Yeah, it's Custos Fiduciary, CUSTOSFIDUCIARY.com. And boy, that's a mouthful.
Okay, excellent. So thanks again. We'll talk to you soon. And everyone, thanks again for listening. Have a great day.